All right, so I mentioned before that with our environment that we wanted these things to be able to fly away. So here is all of my stuff kind of flying away as my camera's zooming in. You could do the same thing with it falling into the land and kind of creating itself too if you wanted to. Okay, but in order for each one of these things to do that, we have to have it set up so that it'll do that. So it's just something that I want you to keep in mind as you're building your stuff, so that we don't get to that last day where you're like, okay, now I'm ready to render, and you have to do all these other steps before that, okay? So I'm just going to skip to a new scene real quick. Actually, I'll go to my other environment. Oops. Sarcona Island. There we go. Okay, so let's say that I'm going to build a castle here. So I'm going to build a castle. Now I could build it out of just like cubes and just kind of create the castle as is. Whatever I want this to look like, that's what I make it look like, okay? My house that I showed before, this is all one shape as each one of these is a separate piece. It just kind of moved and positioned and whatever else. If I want a castle like I showed in the other one where all the bricks are kind of flying away, I have to build it that way. So I'm going to build basically like one brick. It will work for a log cabin or anything too. You just have to think about that stuff as you're building it. When I do this, I'm going to think about, okay, I want one wall and then another wall and another wall and another wall. Okay, so I need basically 4 walls obviously for this castle. You could do more, whatever. As I've shown before, you would use a cloner. So that this item is now inside of a cloner. I hit Alt so that it's underneath it. I go to my objects, I go to my Y number, and I adjust it so that it fits here perfectly. I may need to tweak that a bit more just so that they land perfectly on here. Oops, 2.5 maybe, 2.5, 2.25, so close. Well, 2 wasn't there, was it? All right, I guess 2 is exactly where I want to be. I can check this too if I just go to my cube. Whatever the size Y is, that's what it would be. So I'll just set that to 2 also. Or actually, I'll set it to 1.9. Give it a little bit of space. 1.95. Okay, with this kind of setup, you can do that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate because that would give us a little bit more detail in that building. Now, on the cloner itself, I may not want this to be a linear, just copy it straight up. I may want this to be one of these other ones. So let's say I do a honeycomb array. That changes my settings. So now it's way big, higher up in the air. I'm going to take my size down to 2 and 2 just to bring them closer together. And you'll see now I have basically like a stack of blocks. It's going the other direction. I want them to go side by side, so I'll adjust that. So I'll say instead of the Z, X, Y direction, do the X, Z, Y. There we go. And then I'll adjust again just the size width and the size height. There we go. So size height will probably be 2, and the size width will probably be whatever this is in the X direction. Nope, sorry, in the Z direction, 5. Right, yep. Cool. You can move the cloner up, obviously, to get that aligned correctly. I think I do need to scoot it up maybe a little bit more. There we go. If it sticks through the ground, that's not a huge deal either. So if it's like that, that's not a huge deal. You can definitely have that. I'm going to take the width down so that these actually like touch each other. 1.95. Nope. When you get to those small numbers, it's very difficult to get it exactly where you want it without typing stuff in. 9. Oops. 3. All right, we'll pretend that's it, okay? I'm also looking at where these blocks are. I want them to be staggered. When I put one wall next to another wall, if they're lined up perfectly, they'll hit each other. If they're staggered, they'll lock into each other, okay? Cool, so that works. If I want more in the height area or the width area, I can simply just add more. Once I have it set up, it just works like that. There we go. Okay, so there's one wall. Now, to get another wall, I can do a couple things. One of them, I can go to MoGraph, there we go. And I can go to Mo Instance. With the cloner clicked, if I go to Mo Instance, what it does is it makes a copy of that exact wall that I could then rotate and move around and do whatever. The problem with it is if one item moves, then the other item may not move too, okay? Meaning that if I go to this cloner and do this, I want to make sure that that one doesn't do the same thing. When I go to my effector and I added a plane, you'll see that both of them moved away, okay? Even though I just had the one clicked, both of those items moved because the plane effector is affecting this one, which then in turn affects that one, okay? So I'm not going to use a Mo instance for this because I don't want that to affect both of those. I'm going to use another cloner. So I'm going to use a cloner on top of this cloner. The new one will be a radial one, so I can have this wall, I'll have another wall here, another wall there, and another wall there. Okay, so just fanciness and how we're going to be doing that. So another cloner, here it is. This is my wall build cloner. I'll call this my wall duplicate cloner. That way it's easy for me to see exactly what each piece is doing. Now on this one, I want this to not be a linear, I want this to be a radial, which means it's going to duplicate in this round fashion. I'm not going to have it do XY, I'm going to have it do XZ, I believe. Yes, there it is. Okay, so you could do stuff like this if you just had some random item you wanted to have that kind of shape, definitely. This is going to be a castle, so it's going to have 4 walls, so I'll put 4. These are not rotated correctly, so I'll go to the transform here and just give it a 90-degree rotation. And then now all I have to do is just change the radius to bring all those walls back in. Back to object, here's the radius, and the same thing, you just kind of fiddle with that number until these walls lock in place. Okay, now we're kind of far away, so if it's not 100% accurate, that doesn't matter. Okay, this is one of those assignments where we're able to kind of fiddle around with the numbers to get things to look cool, but they don't have to look necessarily accurate. All right, there we go. Now I can take this whole thing and move it exactly where I want this to be, if that's what I wanted to do. If I have other things that I want, like in mine I actually had the bricks that went around as well, I would do the same thing. I'm going to steal this brick, so I just copy it down here. I put another cloner on it. This one will be, at the start of this, a radial cloner. It'll still be in the XZ. If you don't know what they are, click one, see if that does it. Click the other one, see if that does it. It's the best way to do it. The radius is going to be smaller, so something like this. And then I have to rotate these 90 degrees. There we go. And then I can just start adding more in the count direction. Okay, so now I have this rounded area perfect right there. Now I'm going to do the same thing. Now I want my next stack upwards. So then I just add another cloner to this. And then this one is going to be a linear, so it goes up. The height of this should be probably about that number 2. That's what we did for the other one. And I'm also going to rotate each one of these 22.5 degrees, I think I did. Yeah, there we go. And now I'm getting them staggered. The fact that they don't lock up or link up like they would on an actual castle is due to the fact that they're perfectly square. If this was a castle round thing, typically one end would be longer than the other, so you get that tapered look, so they actually like meet each other. I'm perfectly fine with that, okay? If I want more bricks, I can take the, let's see, round castle cloner. I should put tower round. Oops. Vertical tower cloner. It's not a castle. The whole thing is a castle. There we go. So this is the vertical part. If I wanted more of these, I'll go to the round one, and I'll make the radius, let's say, bigger, and then add more inside here. Okay, and that might mean adjusting on the vertical one, adjusting how many degrees each one rotates. There we go. Okay. They intersect here. That's not a big deal. I don't care. It's good enough. You're not going to see it. If I didn't want them to get bigger, I go back to my original cube. I scale it down, so let's say I just cut the numbers, 1, 1, oops. And now those are a lot smaller, so now I can take the radius in. There we go, there, almost, right? 7.5. There we go, that's good. Take the height of this down to 1, so they all stack on top of each other. And then just start adding more. Okay, as big as I want that, I just make it that big. Okay, now we do the same thing. I want 4 of these. I don't use the instancer because I have specific needs for this to do that. So I would use it in another cloner on this whole thing. Now notice, I don't know if it did it. Yeah, there it goes. It might start slowing down. Because of the amount of pieces I have in each one of those walls and the amount of pieces I have in each one of those towers, it might start to slow down, okay? Let it slow down. Just be aware of it. It's easier for me to manipulate it later, right? That's a good point. I could have copied and pasted each wall or each area of that, and that would have worked. But if, let's say I wanted my towers to be taller or make a change to it, then I'd have to delete the other ones, reclone or copy them and paste them. But yeah, you could do that too. Just make sure you clone or copy the entire cloner there, okay? Yep. So I'll get another radial. I want 4 of these, XZ direction. Rotate. This one I'm not going to rotate here because that would only rotate the individual tower, okay? This one I'm going to go to my coordinates and rotate this here. I lied. Why didn't you rotate? Offset, there we go. Oh, because I rotated 90 degrees. Why would it move 90 degrees? I would go 45. There we go, and that's perfect. Cool. And then I just adjust that radius. Again, it doesn't matter that they intersect, and then I can scoot this down. Okay, so I need more of these, let's say, so I go to my vertical, and I just add some more. There we go. Okay. Now, every object you have is going to have effectors and fields on it. It makes the most sense to have all of those things use the same ones instead of individual ones for each item. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this cloner here. Make sure I name it. Tower. Oops. Corner. Tower. And I'm just going to disable this just so I turn it off is all I'm doing, okay? Turn on, turn off. It's just going to make my system a little bit faster as I'm working. I can do the same thing with my walls here. That way I just have the one wall. When I'm ready to see them all, I turn that button back on, okay? So I'm going to go to this tower. I'm going to go to MoGraph Effectors, and eventually I want to add a plane to this, but first I'm going to add a group, okay? Now the group is where we're going to house all of our effectors. That way we have the group affects all these things, and whatever we add into the group will affect all those things. We don't have to add a plane into each one and then come back and add a random into each one. Okay, that's what we don't want to do. So if I go to this, I go to my effectors, you'll see the group is here. If I go to this one, the group isn't there. It has to be on each one. That's how this is going to work. Go to the next one, add the group. Okay, currently the group does nothing. We're just setting this up. There we go. Okay, so now the group is on all of those. I'm just going to click on the group, and now I'll add the specific effectors. So I'll say I want to add a plane to this, because I want all my pieces to either move up or move down. There it goes. It moved away because obviously all those pieces are now part of it. There it is. Did my tower get like, oh, there it is. Shorter. So that's how far I'm moving it up. I can adjust that later. I also want to scale these to -1 so they disappear. And I also want them to rotate, let's say, 45 degrees. And I put 45 in each one of these. As they come up, they'll just kind of like rotate and scale away. That's the idea with giving them those random numbers. Cool. So now I go back to my plane. go back to my fall off, and now I'll add just that linear field that allows me to manually adjust just like we did our text, okay? And that's why we do the text one first, so we can see how this is happening. So now it does what we want. It's not random. We want random on there too, so I'm just going to go to my group, go to MoGraph, go to Effectors, and then also add a random in there. And then we'll do the very similar thing, random positions. The scales I don't need to worry about. They'll just kind of scale down. And then I'll give them random rotations also. Okay, if I jump back to my linear field and move it, those aren't affecting the same pieces. Okay, the random is on everything right now. The linear field is just on this plane. So I have to go to the random, go to the fall off, and drag this into here. So now random and plane are both affecting the same items. As I move that field left and right, it'll affect everything at once. So there it goes. So that's the idea of what we want to do. So now if I were to turn on my corner tower, you'll see how we get this kind of breaking apart look to it. I'll spin this around too and verify that all my pieces are definitely independent. I'll turn on my walls, move that. Oops, come on. Where are you at? There you are. Okay, everything's independent. Now, let's say that I have just a random item that I created. I'll just do a torus. I'll scale this down to an appropriate number, 12 and 4. There we go. Now, I go to my linear field, I move this back and forth. You'll see the torus does not move at all, okay? In order for the torus to be affected by anything that we do MoGraph-wise, it has to be part of that MoGraph system. It has to be part of all that dynamic stuff. So I'm going to go to the torus and just add it to a cloner, and then just set the count to 1. Okay, so now that cloner is just the torus, that's it. Now if I go to the effectors, I drag in that group, and then if I go back to my linear field, now those go away, that goes away, oops, there goes the torus, and that's what we want. So most of the stuff on your island, you can have some things that stick around, but most of the stuff on your island, you want to be able to do that same kind of effect. Now, if I want that to also affect, let's say, all the trees I have, all the houses that I have, this is why this setup is so cool, because all I have to do is go and find the appropriate things. Here's the house cloner. I'm just going to delete these two from there and just drop in that group. Go to my tree cloner. I can delete these two from that. And drop in, oops, I actually didn't want to delete that from there, did I? No. I didn't want the group one on there. That's the one I didn't want. This is the old group that I threw on last class. I'm going to drop in the new group on the tree, and then go to the houses and drop the new group on there. And so now if I go to that linear field, that's what I'll use to make everything either disappear or everything come back. Okay, and if it helps, definitely name your stuff so that you know, animate this field. That's the way you know that's the one I'm going to be animating. Now, if you look at this animation that I have here, the starting point for this, let me deselect my camera. I'm starting this kind of down here at the bottom. And then as it's going into that frame, I see the pieces kind of flying up. There's obviously good spots for this thing to happen, and there's bad spots for this thing to happen. If I'm too far away, I kind of lose the action of it. If I'm too close, I might miss stuff that's happening around there. Okay, so you want to find like a good area. You also might have some weird stuff happen with some of those big items. Like there's my mountain. It took a little bit of tweaking on those rotates to make sure that the mountain didn't like rotate and show the empty side of it. Okay, it's not a huge deal, but I really didn't want that to happen. You can see my trees do that. Okay, now on my camera's animation, if you look at my timeline, you'll see I have a keyframe here at 0, here at 30, here at 45, And then way down here past that, I have another keyframe. When I set this up, I was very deliberate in how I created that camera. Because it's part of the storytelling. It's part of us getting in there and allowing someone to see what this looks like. If I'm way back here, it doesn't feel as big. We kind of lose the whole shape of it, right? If there's too much movement, there's too much movement. Say they can't comprehend what's actually happening to it. So I'm going to grab my animated camera. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Deselect my animated camera. Sometimes cinema just sticks when you grab the camera when you're animating it or moving it. Okay. I'm going to go to the camera. I'm going to go to my object and change my focal length. So let's say 80 is a good number for this. There we go. And it's always good to have this kind of thing set up so that you know. If you built an entire city, an entire area, but your camera never sees it, well, maybe you need to adjust where your stuff is at, okay? So a lot of times I like to add the camera so I have at least an idea of where to put things in my viewpoint, okay? So I like this because my bridge is the first thing to go, so I want to make sure that I show the bridge going. So I'm going to put it basically like right there. That's the start. I go into my coordinates. I set keyframes on all my stuff. I'm going to turn off my random here. Where are you at? Not my random. I'm going to turn off my fields. I'm going to go up to the end at about 160 and then just zoom my camera in. And this is where I want this whole thing to end. If I get too close to my mountains, it's not going to be anything but a block of my mountain that just kind of like flips in front of the camera. So I'm going to be kind of further back. So pretty much like right here is where the end of that's going to go. By the time all of my fields have gone through and they've wiped out all this stuff, I should be seeing at the very last part of this, the mountains kind of disappearing. That should be the end of that. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to set my keyframe. Okay, position and rotate should be the only two things we need. So there's my nice sweep going right into it. Okay. Now I also animated this, which again is not a bad idea to animate these things ahead of time so that again you can kind of see what things are doing, where things are going to be moving, so you can kind of plan for that. If I looked at this and I said, okay, well, my castle is off to the right, there's not a whole lot on the left, that would make me want to build stuff for the left side to kind of balance out the frame a little bit better, okay? Or maybe my colors are too blending in together and I need something to help them pop. That might be something I want to do, all right? So I animated this as well. Let me jump out of my camera so we can see it. So I grabbed this linear field, that's the animating one, and all it does is just move in towards my stuff, like this, and disappears, just like you did on your text. So there's no difference there, okay? Now, the only thing that I did want to change, there's so much detail in the castle of all these bricks flying. That's kind of like the highlight of this entire piece, is having the castle's bricks flying away. Initially, when I did it, that animation happened too quick. I didn't like how fast it was happening. I'll show you what that looked like. I'm just going to delete this keyframe and delete that keyframe there. Let me jump back to my animated camera. We'll hit play and we'll see. All right, there go the boards. It's like a tornado. There's that, there's that. Okay, the trees go away good. And then the castle is like gone, right? And then I'm stuck with basically the mountains for, this is frame 103. I'm stuck with the mountains for a very long time. And then nothing, okay? So it's kind of a boring animation at that point. So what I want to do was I wanted to kind of hold off that happening. I want to basically like get to the sweet spot of that mountain, the castle blowing away, and then have it extend a bit further. So I went to my linear field and I just played. I'm just clicking and dragging in here, waiting until I see the castle start to blow away right there. Okay, so I'm going to go to this, I'm going to set a keyframe. And then I'm going to go to the end of it, right about there, and I'm going to set another keyframe. So these two keyframes here are those keyframes for the castle moving. If I want that to be longer, I just pull those keyframes apart. And so what should happen is we get pretty quick to the castle, and then we have this kind of like matrix effect of the castle blowing away, and then we speed up for the rest of it, okay? So depending on how far apart these are, we'll get different results. So I'm just going to drag. I'm going to try to drag because it's so tiny. There it is. I'll drag this to, like, let's say 130. I'll drag this one back to, let's say 40. I'll rewind, and then I'll play again. And we'll get a little bit different result. The object's going to move faster here. You can see, here goes the trees. And then there goes the castle. And now we get a lot better view of this castle kind of breaking apart. And again, it's going to be just make it a more interesting animation than just showing off that you can do it. And now here at the end, notice the last couple 20 frames, we're seeing stuff happen, okay? Now the other part of this is I also want to animate my camera to kind of match up with that a little bit better. By the time my camera gets to the castle, it's kind of already blowing away. So I'm doing the same thing. Like, this is a good spot for it to be when it gets to the castle, when the castle starts moving. So I'm just going to set a keyframe here and then just drag this back. Maybe there. I think too, like, let me go back to that keyframe. I think I maybe want to rotate the camera up a little bit. So I'm just going to go in here. Nope, not that one. There it is. There we go. And then animate the rotate as well. So this way I'm kind of coming in and kind of swooping up to see the rest of it. There it goes. I can actually see the mountains better now too. Okay, now the camera might be going too fast here because it's going like through the castle as it's going, and I want to hang back a little bit more. So I'm going to go to, let's say, this spot. Again, I'll set a, oops, actually not there. Let me go to, let's say, this spot. I'll set a keyframe on my camera and then just push that up some. Okay, that way my camera just hangs out a bit longer. I don't like that it's rotating down already, so let's also fix that. Click here, click on that rotate. There we go, that's good. And then there go the mountains. Okay, now at the very end, the rotate goes back down, so I'm just going to fix that permanently, so I'm always looking up. And this is just part of the animation process. You're never going to get it exactly right the first time you animate something. Cool. Now, the last thing I want to do, I don't like things being synced up. So my camera stops, the mountains go up. Like, those are the two things that happen at the same time. What I want to happen is my camera continues moving past my mountains being gone, okay? So I'm going to go to this last keyframe, and this is a nice thing about Cinema, is you can just change when that keyframe happens by typing in a number. So instead of it happening at 160, I'm going to say 180, okay? So now what should happen is the mountains are gone, but my camera is still moving, okay? So we just get this better feel for how this animation happens. There goes that. I'll probably put a door on there too. Now, with ambient occlusion on here, you'll really see a lot of these bricks kind of moving because of that. All right, so my camera's still moving, the mountains are still moving, and you see the camera is still just, it's slight, but it's still moving a bit. Now, what's also cool, like after I would render this out, I could bring this into After Effects, add some sound effects, right, of things being ripped out of the ground. If you ever seen Spaceballs, there's a scene where they're like sucking all the oxygen off the planet, and all the trees get sucked out of the planet, and they make these cool like sound effects. And then when they put them back in, they make the same sound effect but backwards. Cool. Okay. So now that the camera's set up, now that my linear field is set up, I jump back out, I rewind it all the way to the beginning, and then I can start building more stuff, tweaking things, modifying things as I see fit. Okay. And then I'm always jumping back to the camera, seeing how it looks, jumping back to this view, changing things, modifying it. Okay? So that should pretty much wrap up as far as the MoGraph stuff goes, and as far as the cloners and as far as that goes, should wrap up that part. I'll talk again about setting up the final settings for our stuff, but you should have everything else kind of wrapped up in that. Monday, I'll do that other part of getting all of those things.